Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be talking to you about SurfMo. So odds are, if you guys have been playing, you already know what the deal is with her, but if you're newer to FGO, you've maybe heard a lot about Surfer Mordred, aka Rider Mordred. She's our summer variant of Mordred. She's been around since year one. She doesn't get a lot of banners, and this is actually going to be her first true solo raid up in a long time. She's going to get another one next year, but she basically hasn't had one going on, I believe, 2 or 3 years now. She did appear in the background of some other banners, but they either weren't solo raid ups or had no raid up at all in the case of the AoE Summer banner. So, obviously, this is going to be a prime time for a lot of people to roll for her. She will be out this, well, Wednesday evening, but I'll probably be rolling Thursday for her myself if you want to come check me out here on Twitch. But anyways, to give you guys the lowdown on her, I think the big elephant in the room with regards to SurfMo is going to be Khadroth. That is to say, those of you that have already completed LB6 and managed to acquire your free copy and subsequently have rolled more out of the FP pool have a very good looping AoE arts writer for free. So the question comes down to, should you roll for SurfMo? And that's something that's a little bit harder to answer, as it definitely depends on your enthusiasm for SurfMo. Needless to say, the big issue with SurfMo is not her refund. SurfMo is actually one of the best refunders in the entire game. She easily refunds over 100% when properly supported. This is basically made even more possible by Castoria nowadays, and so the issue instead becomes more of her damage output. This is something that she has dramatically lacked in comparison to some of her other 5-star counterparts, and certainly now with comparison to Khadroth that you're guaranteed the 5 copies of eventually, it's certainly a cause for concern with her. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you guys here through SurfMo's kit, and we're going to talk about my experiences with using her both at a high NP level and not, and all of the things that I think you should consider when rolling for SurfMo. Understand, I'm going to make her sound very good, but don't feel obligated to roll, even though this will be her first banner in a long time. So, starting off right here at the bat, we can easily see that SurfMo is a 4-star. She is a rare limited 4-star. You don't have a whole lot of banner availability for this unit. So instead it's going to come down more a little bit towards, again, how many copies can you get and how much do you have to actually spare to roll for her. That being said, with regards to her overall stats here, you can see she does start out at about 9.2k attack. This is actually not a bad attack stat, and this is why I say, even though the issue is damage, remember my mantra here that you should not always judge the book by its cover. Just because the stats are a certain way doesn't necessarily prove out the entirety of the servant's capability, because a lot of it's bogged down in the entirety of their kit. So again, she does have good attack power for a 4-star. This is in the solid range for them. It's not 10k, it's not the upper echelon of 4-stars, but that's relatively rare. 9.2k is still actually pretty solid. She does have 11.4k HP, not the thickest out there, but certainly thick enough for a 4-star, and she does have hard survival in her kit. It's actually one of her really upsides to having her, is the fact that she's actually fairly hard to take down in certain challenge scenarios. And this has actually worked to my advantage numerous times in these Saberface only runs that I've done with her, as SurfMo actually did manage to save a pesky battle that I had all the way back against Scheherazade in, again, Epic of Remnant. So that was back in the early days of the Saberface only runs, and without her, we didn't have some of the other writers at the time for the Saberfaces. I don't think I would have actually gotten through that fight. Certainly here you can see she is Earth attributed. That's neither here nor there, but it's not a bad thing for her. And she does have 204-star absorption. This is slightly higher than average, but again, she is an arts unit, so we can expect maybe a little bit slightly higher in order to help that out. The thing with this is, she is a writer, so writers naturally have very high star absorption rate, so you don't have to worry about this too much. Just note that SurfMo will have the benefit as an arts unit of being able to soak quite a few stars. She does have a star generation rate of 9.2, not that great, but hey, it is what it is. Again, don't expect to generate too much with her, but her quick cards aren't too terrible for it. She does have 0.71 NP charge attack rate, and she's actually one of the few units that has actually seen a stat adjustment in this regard. She's one of our only units in the game to have ever really gotten this. Both her and Squirtoria had their refund amounts tweaked after they originally came out on JP. NA already had the original version, or sorry, the updated version, so we never had to worry about it. But again, this is one of the reasons why SurfMo is such a strong refunder. 0.71 doesn't seem that high, but it will start to seem a lot higher when you start to look at the totality of her kit. She does have 3% charge defense, which is just the amount that she gets per hit when she is hit. And then again, she has 35% death rate here. This is slightly higher than average, but it's nothing too concerning. Just, again, maybe don't take her up against, assassins, but you probably weren't going to do that as a rider anyways. She is chaotic good for her alignment. Nothing too special there. She is female gendered. Her traits are Artoria Face, Dragon, Hominidae Servant, Humanoid, Round Table Knight, Normal Servant, Seven Knights Servant, Summer Mode Servant, and Weak to Intimate Elish. So quite a bit here to exploit. Again, there should be some way to find some way to get special damage against her if you manage to be facing her. Now, here we see her actual deck, her card deck here, with the hit counts assigned. She only has the 2 arts cards, so she doesn't have triple arts here, so she's not totally busted in that regard. In other words, yes, you can still form a triple arts chain with her, but you are going to require her NP or someone else's card in order to make that happen. And certainly she does have the 2 quick cards here, probably a nod back to her Saber form in order to help that out a little bit. Again, the quick cards here have actually average hit counts at 3, but the arts cards are coming in a little bit less than average at only 2. This is, again, though, largely due to the high NP gain rate that she has, and certainly the rest of her kit. I think they probably felt like she would be too cracked if they did give her more, so I think she kind of came in right on the money as to where her performance needed to be. The Buster card is only 1 hit. We don't really care too much about that, and the only, I'd say, maybe disappointing thing is that the extra attack is only 4 hits, which is 1 slightly less than average. So it is what it is. Again, her Buster card will be fine, but we don't really care about the hit counts of a Buster card too much because a lot of that's tied into NP generation and star generation, neither of which Buster is super good for. It's actually the second best star generating card, but usually you don't care too much about the hit counts on it. So we get to her first skill here. Her first skill is Cerulean Ride. It is going to be a 3 turns art buff for herself of 30%. That right there is strong in and of itself. It's also only on a 5-turn cooldown, so you can expect relatively solid performance out of it. Definitely something that you're going to want to keep up the majority of the time. And actually, this brings us to a good moment to mention that because SurfMo has some of the highest NP generation in the entire game, you end up running into scenarios very routinely here that she can actually loop for more than 3 turns. This was actually a tactic that was used quite prolifically back in the day against some rather pesky node designs that we used to run into. That is, fights that maybe went longer than 3 waves, or again, maybe you had multiple waves within waves. That is to say, different sets of enemies, so that you had maybe 6 enemies in a wave, but they came out in 2 sets instead of just, 6 at a time, like you kind of get now. SurfMo was actually used to loop over the top of some of these things relatively easy. In fact, there was a rather ingenious exploit back during the original CCC event, where SurfMo could actually loop over the nodes that took most people longer than 6 turns to clear. She could actually do them in 6 turns by virtue of exploiting her, not only her 3 turns of uptime, but also the ability to get back to her buffs by the final turn of the loop against the boss, and also to be able to refund in the interim turns when she didn't have buffs up by virtue of low hitting and utilizing a Tamamo NP. There was a hilarious synergy there that managed to work. So that's something that I think can really be taken away about SurfMo, is that SurfMo, her refund is so good that you can actually make her refund over multiple turns beyond just 3. It's rare that you'll find yourself in a scenario to need this, but it is useful when you do. So that is something that's very good about the low cooldown of this skill and the high uptime of it. Her second skill here is a hard evasion right here for 1 turn. Definitely nice to see. And then increases her own critical star generation rate for 1 turn by up to 50%. So you can see that she didn't have the highest star generation rate here anyways, but this will certainly help it out, as you could use it to potentially get a little bit more. I'm going to say not going to get the best results when using it with her NP, because again, arts cards don't generate that many stars. You pretty much have to skew things in your favor to even get them to generate one. But I would definitely try to target this with concerns to whenever you're going to have the quick cards. That will definitely help you out if you're actually managing to have to card with her. But again, I think the big takeaway here is that you're going to be using the hard survival skill to survive. That is to say, you're going to try to use this to avoid an NP if you maybe don't kill the enemy in time or something like that. This is on a 7-turn cooldown, understandable because it is such a nice skill and it is her survival. That's why they're going to keep this a little bit on the higher end in terms of its cooldown rate. Her third skill here, though, adds to that survivability. It grants herself gut status 1 time for 3 turns with the ability to revive at 1000 HP when she pops back. So it's not a 1 HP revive, but it's also not like a 3k revive. It's rather anemic in terms of the amount of health it gets you. You could very easily just see her get smacked right back into the abyss with just a single hit at only 1k. Still, it is another hard survival ability, and there are numerous ways to exploit guts to make it so that the enemy doesn't hit you after the fact. So there is a very nice amount of survivability there, but it doesn't just stop there, because SurfMo gets charge. She already refunds very well, but she gets 30% charge on top of that, also this skill being on a 7-turn cooldown. So yeah, there's definitely some nice stuff that you can utilize here in order to keep SurfMo alive should she manage not to kill, as she does have 2 hard survival skills in her kit, something I think that's often overlooked about her. She gets magic resistance B here for some debuff resistance, adding to her overall, sort of challenge capability. And then surfing A, this is sort of her unique spin on the riding trait. Instead of getting riding, she gets surfing A. That's going to increase her arts performance instead of quick performance, and increase her own critical star generation rate by 5% as well on top of that. So definitely nice. This is going to help add to that refund that she can get. You guys can already see she had a 0.71 NP gain rate. She had 30% of arts up. She had 30% charge. She gets 5% extra from her passive here. So things are beginning to look good for her. And if you thought they weren't good already, we can start to talk about the appends where, yeah, you could start her with mana loading and it's going to be even more cracked. So yes, while refund is not the biggest of concerns with her, and the reason I'm saying this, just so that you guys are aware, is that against even 2 caster enemies, SurfMo with double Castoria will refund over 100%. So it is very possible to refund SurfMo against single enemy waves. The big issue is, can you kill them? Because SurfMo's damage is not the best. So it's not a factor of refund. If you want someone to be able to refund enough, SurfMo is your girl. She will easily be able to handle the refund requirements for just about any node. Again, though, you can see you could start her out with mana loading. This would maybe save your ability to use certain damage capabilities until later turn, or again, maybe manipulate your charge in such a way if you are going up against some weird sort of scenario where it's like a single enemy wave or something like that. So I'm not going to say mana loading is the worst, even though she has such a great refund capability. In fact, it may just be to your benefit if you manage to have some sort of hybrid setup as well, where you're doing multiple damage dealers. Maybe that's sort of the issue, is you've got a 3-1-3 type of node. You need SurfMo to handle the first and the third wave, but you got to have somebody to handle the high health single enemy in the second wave. That's where you just throw another person in, and having SurfMo have the mana loading on is going to help her get to an NP even faster and make her take up less of the resources in terms of actual charge on the outset in order to get to that initial NP. So for that sort of scenario, this would work perfect. But again, it's totally up to you if you wish to use the coins, because coins will be a concern with a limited 4-star. Her third skill here is anti-saber attack damage aptitude. This is a nod back to her original saber form. Doesn't really provide her any benefit here, as she doesn't have any niche damage in her rider form, so nothing too much to worry about. But it is a nice thing should you have the coins for it, just probably not the best. I would say instead, probably at that point, go with the extra attack finesse, as this will help that 4 hit count extra card do a little bit better. This is going to not only increase the damage by 50%, but also the star generation and the NP generation. So certainly something that's nice for her to have. Well, in terms of pecking order, I would tell you to go with the mana loading first, then maybe the extra attack, and then your third and very distant consideration would be the anti-saber attack damage aptitude. And I don't say this in enough of my videos, but as for the skill order, it should be relatively apparent. You want the arts up as much as you can, because that's just going to facilitate looping. For the next skill, I would honestly go with the third skill. That's the charge. Normally, I actually tell people to level their charge first before their steroids, but SurfMo's sort of an example of where, hey, as long as you can get to that NP, you can probably loop. So you probably should go with the first skill first. And then the third skill, honestly, it doesn't have that pressing of a need. Maybe take it to like level 6. You certainly don't have to level 10 it if you don't want to, but it is still a good skill nonetheless. Then we get to her NP. Now, her NP is 5 hits. So that should be your easy key right there as to why she refunds so much. This is compared to a unit like, say, Space Ishtar that only has like 3 hits, and you wonder why, you know, maybe SurfMo's a little bit broken with a 0.71 NP gain rate and a 5-hit NP, plus 5% from her passive, plus 30% from her first skill. And that's not even considering supports. So yeah, there's a lot of NP gain to be had here, and it doesn't really stop there. Again, you can see she's going to deal damage to all enemies, and she has a chance to reduce their gauge by 1. Another little known aspect to her that I have abused in my Saber Face only runs. I have used SurfMo to drain enemy bosses. It's not totally reliable, but if you're looping, if you're spamming that NP, if you're going over and over and over again, you very easily could find yourself in a situation that, yeah, hey, she will actually deprive an enemy of their NP or make it take longer to get to it. So I have certainly had to rely on a clutch NP every now and then for a drain, but yes, I do think that this is a sort of often overlooked aspect to her that is still actually useful depending on the scenario that you take her into. Again, you're going to be wanting to farm with SurfMo. She is a very good refunder, but hey, yeah, occasionally if you want to do a challenge with her, I think you'll find it's actually pretty enjoyable. So that's her overarching kit right there. As for what I recommend using with her, I, can't help but mention Black Grail. When damage is a concern and refund isn't, Black Grail is your go-to because that's the best damage boosting CE in the game. Certainly, this is going to give you a lot of synergy here, and this would mean that using an Oberon as your third support may be something that you would want to do. The problem that you're going to have with something like that is, depending on whether or not you're using something like Black Grail, it may be better to use a different support. That is to say, Oberon doesn't really offer SurfMo that much of an advantage. You actually get more damage out of running, say, a Tamamo or even, someone else like a Proto Merlin down the line or a Santa Martha, assuming their stuff actually is applicable. So at the end of the day, what she really needs is damage, not necessarily charge, and Oberon specializes in providing damage amplification and charge, but he's really not going to get her a lot of benefit out of, again, his Buster Up, and while his NP damage can be doubled, he would be the only source of NP damage outside of Mystic Codes, or again, sort of craft essences if you're carrying any of it on that. So his usefulness could be diminished there. I'm not telling you not to use him. He may be the best third support in certain scenarios for her. But you should certainly consider what all is at play and how much NP damage you actually have in the comp, because that's what's going to determine whether or not using Oberon is actually good. Otherwise, you may want to look at one of those other third supports like Tamamo, since she doesn't really need the extra charge. But again, Black Grail is certainly nice. You can also do something like Royal Icing. This is going to get her even more arts up. It's also going to get her NP damage. So most of these craft essence recommendations are going to be all attack scaling CEs that basically should give you some form of damage amplification. You're not going to see me really recommend anything that gives NP gain, because she doesn't need it. It's honestly overkill, and basically at that point, you should be thinking about how you can provide her with more damage instead. So don't waste any of the itemization of a craft essence on NP gain when you could potentially be doing things that would get you more damage synergy. So again, Royal Icing is nice. It is an old welfare C if you guys managed to have it from the Oniland event. And then obviously a much newer version, but this one would be a charge-focused version, is going to be Ocean Flyer. This one's going to be solid. It starts up in NP damage, but yeah, I think that's one of the concerns that you have charge here. This might be good in a hybrid setup, or maybe, again, some sort of crazy 1-1-X type of node where you just didn't need the charge. Or maybe you're trying to make do with less in terms of your supports. So starting her out with charge maybe is enough to help it work. Maybe you're trying to get away with someone like an Asclepius or Shufu as another support, maybe a Nero Bride, maybe, again, just someone that's a brute force charger because maybe you don't have a Castoria of your own or something like that. So these are scenarios that you might find yourself sort of having use out of a 50% charge CE. And for that matter, we do have another old welfare CE here in Heavenly Demon Princess that could also work. It's also all attack scaling, NP damage of 15%, arts crit of 20%, and starting battle at 50% gauge. Again, from there, much further into the future, this actually came out this year in the Valentine's event on JP, you do have another nice CE that allows you to ignore invincibility. This one's all attack scaling, gives arts up, again, of, let's just say 5% at MLB, because assuming you've gotten this, you probably had to gotcha for it. And from right there, you could also see she gives NP damage right here on this CE of 20%, so this could also help out. And remember, the more NP damage you've got, the more you're going to want to consider that Oberon. Now, I think the issue with something like this is it's far away, so for those of us on NA, there is some that have already come out, like Detective Edmund right here is another sort of ignore invincibility and arts up CE. It's actually pretty nice. The only issue is it split stats, and, well, it actually has another issue, and that's that if you don't have this, or you didn't get this from the original Chaldea Boys 2017, that should be a warning sign for you, because any of you that have watched some of my older videos probably remember that I've told you guys that buying your 2017 Chaldea Boys collection out of the Rare Prism shop is actually pretty nice. And the reason why is because it's one of your only ways to get a taunt CE in current year. And that CE is Outrage. It is a 4-star CE that is available on it. So don't buy the Invuln Pierce CE there. If you ever need to make a choice here, I highly recommend getting Outrage instead. It's a much better purchase off that original banner. And sadly, I think that is what a lot of people did when the event actually originally came out. So probably not too many people with this craft essence regardless. There is Blue Illusion. This one comes from a basically a later Chaldea Boys. This one has Ignore Invincibility and NP damage up of 30%. Again, split stats, so that's sort of some of your considerations there. You do have Sweet Crystal, but again, this one is going to have starting charge. It's all attack. This one can actually be gotten in your Rare Prism shop. The only problem is it costs 5 per copy. So in order to get MLB, you're looking at 25 Rare Prisms. Quite the hefty load. I don't recommend buying it until you're much deeper into your account's history, but certainly there is a much better and easier CE that most people have easy access to over time. And that's Origin Bullet. If you really just need Invuln Pierce, yeah, there's stuff out there like Honey Lake that are really nice, but if you don't have access to them, Origin Bullet is a permanent CE. It is all attack scaling. It gives Invincibility Pierce, and it does give Power Mod against caster class enemies by 35 at single copy or 40% at MLB. So it's actually quite the nice damage amplification and right in SurfMo's wheelhouse. That's going to be the one you will probably want to go with. Now, as to all the talk about SurfMo's damage, this is kind of where we end up. As you can see, again, taking a look at the NP damage list here, remember these are neutral numbers. These are not effective numbers. They don't consider supports. They don't consider craft essences or mystic codes. But you can see here, just for a nice sort of frame of reference, that SurfMo is at the bottom of the list. And that's kind of the issue that you run into with her, is that she is a limited 4-star. So you can't guarantee that you're going to have NP5 unless you devotedly roll for it. As such, you're only doing about 14k neutral damage with no supports at NP1. At NP5, you'd be dealing 23k, almost 24k, which isn't that great. But for frame of reference here, it's really not that astounding. As you can see, even as of this point right here, this is still 23k. So it's only when you get to Drake on upward that the damage numbers at NP1 begin to start jumping quite a bit. Otherwise, you could certainly look at a unit like Odysseus and see he's only 22.3k, and all of his stuff is kind of just going to be online the whole way. Same thing with Da Vinci, she's only at 20k. So if you manage to have higher NP levels of SurfMo, she will still manage to outperform some of these other units, especially if you can get her to that NP5 rank. The issue here is, even at only NP2, SurfMo's really not that far behind a Da Vinci NP1. So it's going to take you having multiple MP levels of some of the other options for them to really outscale her. This is why I've said, to me, the real concern isn't Da Vinci, isn't Odysseus, it's going to be Khadroth. Khadroth at NP1 is pound for pound just higher than her. Now, this does include Khadroth's second skill being popped, which, depending on how you're trying to handle the loop, you might not want to do right away. But otherwise, I think you can assume that this will be in play by the third turn, which is where you're going to actually need and want the damage. The issue, though, is that, yeah, you can pretty much guarantee that you will have NP5 with Khadroth eventually. So SurfMo cannot reach those heights. What you're going to be looking for scenarios for SurfMo to really pop off in are, hey, I don't care what the structure of the node is, I don't care that there's so few units, I'm still looping over it, and still doing it maybe even from like a Black Grail standpoint. Khadroth can certainly loop with a Black Grail as well. I think the only issue is going to be the actual hard refund numbers there, and whether or not you can utilize that to SurfMo's advantage. So I'm not telling you to roll for SurfMo. Khadroth is a free and available unit to you as long as you progressed far enough into the story. But if you haven't, SurfMo can be a really nice pick-me-up, and even in spite of having Khadroth, SurfMo is just very easy to use. So it really just kind of depends on what you run into. Now, there are certain setups that you can use for SurfMo. That could be things like, basically a Castoria with a Tamamo type setup, and she'd still be able to refund 100%. So maybe your third support's someone like an Oberon at that point, as you get the double synergy there. Maybe you go double Castoria Tamamo. Maybe you go Nero Bride Castoria Tamamo. There's various different things that you should be able to make work because SurfMo's refund is so good. I think the big way to talk about her and units like her is going to be to talk about them only with two supports. And that's going to give you an idea of their actual overall damage. So just kind of talking about that right there. Basically, if it's just Castoria and Tamamo, you're kind of looking at wave 1 being about 88k, wave 2 being about 88k, and then wave 3, and this is actually, if you include Oberon at this point, it'd be 180k. So you'd see a huge spike there due to all the MP damage. But if it's just no plug suit, right, just SurfMo at that point, you're basically looking at scenarios where her damage should be pretty okay, but certainly a concern. Basically, with just SurfMo and double Castoria and a level 100 Black Grail and a level 10 original Mystic Code, you're looking at 77k on wave 1, 77k on wave 2, and then 104, almost 105k on wave 3 at NP1. Those numbers spike up quite a bit to 103k for the first two waves, and then 140k for the third wave. So certainly getting that NP2 can really help out. I do kind of recommend that if you're going to roll for SurfMo, maybe try to get at least 2 copies to help out the damage. NP1's damage really can suffer at times. So I do think that's one of the rare times that I actually will recommend you going a little bit deeper. But again, there's other comparisons that we can make to that. So for instance, just double Castoria Black Grail with Khadroth, you'd be looking at 100k on wave 1, 120k on wave 2, and 198k on wave 3, basically. So certainly significantly better numbers, right? The thing at play with all of this is going to be, can Khadroth do it with a Black Grail with just the two of them? In some scenarios, yes, but if you start realizing that you could be up against lesser wave structures and stuff like that, Khadroth does have the 80% charge to work to her advantage, but that may delay some of her damage, and it may not still enable her, just depending on the set of circumstances and the classes that you're up against. So it really does depend. With regards to someone like, say, Ryder Da Vinci with double Castoria, you're interestingly enough looking at 100k on wave 1, 98k on wave 2, and 138k on wave 3 at MP1. So you're looking pretty comparable to SurfMo at that point. It really just boils down to the NP levels of all of these units and which one you want to have. And with Odysseus, basically with just he would actually have to use Fragment of 2004 instead if he just wanted double Castoria. But you'd be looking at 106k wave 1, 106k wave 2, and 131k wave 3. And so just very quickly kind of go back here to SurfMo and mention one last comp here, and that would be the NP5 numbers for SurfMo. This is NP5, just double Castoria, Black Grail, and a level 10 OG Mystic Code. You're now looking at 128k, 128k, and 184k. And so these numbers definitely seem a lot better. This is where I've said, if you're going to roll for her, getting more NP levels can actually make the difference. And it will make her a lot more viable in the face of certain other options. The big question is going to be, do you really want her? Do you want to spend the quartz on her when you know you have Habitrot? But if you feel like you're just not going to have easy access to multiple copies of Habitrot, or you don't think that you can get her unlocked for a long time, SurfMo can definitely be a good solid option for you. And like I said, in spite of that, she's still a good option regardless, just due to that loopability and that ease of use. So it's up to you to determine whether or not you wish to roll, and if you don't roll here, you will have, again, another banner next year. So let me know what you guys think about SurfMo. Would you like to see SurfMo get an NP interlude or some sort of damage upgrade at this point? And will you be rolling for SurfMo? I know I'm going to be, but that's because, you know, I'm the Saberface guy and I try to complete all my Saberfaces. So she will actually be my last Saberface to NP5. But I hope to see you guys there for the rolls on Thursday. And again, have a good one. And if you plan to roll, may the courts be with you. Later.